Usually, like when we talk about a medical diagnosis, um, there's this expectation of absolute, I don't know, engineering level precision,
Oh, for sure.
right? Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor just points to it. Like the bone is broken or it isn't. It feels incredibly visible and clean.
Yeah, and comforting. We really crave that binary categorization, especially in healthcare. When we're vulnerable, we want undeniable certainty.
Exactly. But getting to a place where we can genuinely trust that x-ray machine or, the clinical trial for the pain medication they give you that relies on an underlying process that is honestly a lot more messy.
Oh, way more messy.
Yeah, and murky than just a simple snapshot. So we are unpacking scientific reasoning today in this deep dive, and our sources for this include some really incredible historical notes on the philosophy of science, along with study guides that are specifically tailored for anyone prepping for the TEAS and HESI nursing entrance exams.
Which is great because the concepts we're covering today, I mean, they're the literal foundation of those exams.
Right.
But even beyond passing a test, this deep dive is fundamentally about how to think like a scientist. It's about understanding how humanity actually evaluates evidence and decides what is true.
Yeah, so the mission here is to give you a shortcut to acing those exams by going way beyond the flashcards. We want to unpack the fascinating and sometimes, honestly, dangerous history of how science actually works in practice.
It really is a wild history.
It is, because to start, most textbooks give you this very neat, like four-step definition of scientific reasoning. You observe a phenomenon, you propose a testable explanation, which is your hypothesis, you design an experiment to check it, and then you revise based on the data.
Right, which implies this very disciplined, straightforward process for forming beliefs. Based on evidence rather than intuition.
But I'm going to push back on that framework right away, because that sounds like a middle school science fair checklist.
It kind of does, yeah. Question, hypothesis, experiment, conclusion.
Done. But like, an astronomer can't exactly put a collapsing star into a test tube to run a controlled experiment. Or an evolutionary biologist, they can't replay a million years of genetic drift. So if that four-step checklist is the ultimate gold standard, are they just not doing science?
Well, that tension right there is exactly why the rigid checklist is a massive oversimplification. Scientific reasoning is actually this highly debated, discipline-specific cluster of practices.
Which makes studying for it tricky.
Exactly. So to understand what nursing exams actually expect from you when they ask for a valid conclusion, we have to look at how humanity figured out how to draw conclusions in the first place.
Right.
We actually have to rewind to the year 1620 to a philosopher named Francis Bacon.
Okay, because before Bacon, the intellectual world was essentially just, leaning on ancient authorities.
Pretty much entirely, yeah. The prevailing scholastic tradition back then relied on pure deductive logic, heavily influenced by Aristotle.
Top-down thinking.
Exactly. Thinkers would start with a grand, universally accepted principle, usually handed down by the church or some ancient authority, and just reason downward to explain specific events. But Bacon rejected that top-down approach completely.
Good for him.
Yeah. In his work Novum Organum, he championed inductive reasoning. He argued that we have to start from the ground up.
So, observations first.
Right. Collect careful, direct observations of nature without prejudice, look for patterns, and slowly build general conclusions from those patterns.
It's like gathering puzzle pieces one by one until you can finally see the big picture.
That's a great way to put it.
Which sounds completely logical to our modern ears.
Ugh.
But philosophers a century later spotted a massive structural flaw in that method, didn't they?
They did. In the 1740s, David Hume introduced what's known as the problem of induction.
Okay, walk us through that.
Well, Hume pointed out this devastating logical reality, which is that no finite number of specific observations can logically guarantee a universal law.
So if I wake up every morning and see the sunrise, and I do that like 10,000 days in a row, I haven't definitively proven that the sun will rise tomorrow.
Exactly.
I'm just assuming the future is going to look like the past.
Precisely. And this actually brings up a couple of terms from the exam toolkit that we should probably lock in right now.
Oh, definitely. Scientific laws versus scientific theories. People mix these up all the time.
All the time. And the exam will test that distinction. So a scientific law describes a consistent, observable pattern in nature. Like the law of gravity, it describes that objects fall toward the Earth. It tells you what happens.
Right. Based on all those accumulated observations.
But it doesn't explain the cause. A scientific theory, on the other hand, is a broad, well-tested, explanatory framework. It explains why or how the pattern happens, and it's supported by massive amounts of evidence.
But because of Hume's problem of induction, neither laws nor theories can be proven with absolute mathematical certainty just by, piling up more observations.
Right. And that problem just sat there unresolved until 1934 when Karl Popper published The Logic of Scientific Discovery. And Popper completely flipped the script.
How so?
He argued that science doesn't advance by proving theories true. It advances by proving them false.
Okay, falsification.
Yes. Popper stated that a theory is only scientific if it makes risky predictions that could, in principle, be shown to be wrong. Science isn't about verification. It's about trying to destroy your own ideas.
I actually have an analogy for this that helped it click for me.
Oh, let's hear it.
So think about testing a watch that claims to be waterproof. If you want to prove it's waterproof, you don't just wear it on a sunny day 10,000 times and say, look, it still works.
Right. That's just piling up cheap confirmation.
Exactly. If you really want to prove it's waterproof,
Yeah.
you take it to the deep end of the pool, you throw it in, you actively try to break it. And if it survives the pressure, then you provisionally trust it.
That is a beautiful way to visualize falsification. A theory earns our trust only by surviving serious, rigorous attempts to sink it. And Popper actually developed this concept to counter popular ideas of his time, like psychoanalysis. He observed that some theories were so flexible they could explain away any outcome after the fact.
So they were basically cheating the test.
Basically, if a patient acted aggressively, psychoanalysis had an explanation. If they acted passively, it had a different explanation. Popper argued that if a theory explains everything, it forbids nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, if there's no possible outcome that would prove it wrong, it's unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific.
So science is essentially a demolition derby for ideas.
Exactly.
But just when Popper provides this clean, logical framework, Thomas Kuhn comes along in 1962 and points out that human beings are terrible at being purely logical.
We really are. Kuhn looked at the actual history of science and realized scientists don't spend their days trying to falsify their own life's work.
Right. Who would want to do that?
Right. Instead, they operate inside what he called a paradigm, which is a shared set of assumptions, methods, and beliefs. Most scientists spend their careers just doing routine puzzle solving within that safe framework.
They act more like a social club protecting their turf. They ignore the waterproof watches that break.
Yeah, exactly.
But eventually, the anomalies have to pile up, right?
Yeah.
Like, what happens when the puzzle pieces clearly stop fitting the paradigm?
Well, that triggers a scientific revolution. The paradigm physically breaks down under the weight of unexplainable data and a new framework takes over. Like the messy, dramatic shift from Newtonian physics to Einstein's relativity.
Okay, so Kuhn highlighted that science isn't just cold logic. It's deeply entangled in social dynamics, egos, and, psychological resistance.
It's very human.
Right.
Yeah.
And the exams you were preparing for demand rigid logic, evaluating evidence as if we are purely rational beings.
Yeah.
But science in the real world is executed by flawed humans.
It is.
So the tension between Popper's ideal logic and Kuhn's messy reality is exactly how science eventually self-corrects. Let's actually move out of the realm of philosophy and look at how this reasoning functions in the field.
Yeah, let's do some real-world examples.
Let's examine some real medical mysteries, where evaluating evidence was literally a matter of life and death. We're going to a maternity hospital in Vienna in 1847 with Ignaz Semmelweis.
Okay, the conditions Semmelweis faced were just horrific. The hospital had two separate maternity clinics. One was staffed by doctors and medical students, and the other entirely by midwives.
And the outcomes were vastly different.
Terrifyingly different. Mothers in the doctor's clinic were dying of childbed fever at a rate of roughly 10%, sometimes much higher. But in the midwives' clinic, the mortality rate was consistently around 1%.
And people at the time blamed everything from the alignment of the planets to, bad air in the ward.
Right, miasma theory.
But Semmelweis didn't accept vague authority. He approached it by looking for the distinct variables. And right here is a perfect place to map this to our exam vocabulary.
Oh, absolutely.
So Semmelweis noticed a crucial difference. The doctors routinely performed autopsies on plague victims before walking over to deliver babies. The midwives did no autopsies.
Never.
So he formed a specific testable prediction, a hypothesis. He proposed that cadaverous particles from the corpses were being carried on the doctor's hands.
And to test this, he instituted a strict intervention. He required the doctors to wash their hands and instruments in a chlorinated lime solution before touching any patients.
Okay, so in exam terms, That hand-washing mandate is the independent variable. It is the specific condition that the researcher actively manipulates or changes.
Yes. And the dependent variable, the outcome that is measured to see if the intervention worked, was the mortality rate.
Right.
Furthermore, the midwife's clinic, which just continued operating as usual without the autopsy exposure, essentially served as his naturally occurring control group.
Which is so important.
It's crucial. A control group allows you to hold other environmental factors constant so you can isolate the effect of that one single cause.
And the results were undeniable. The mortality rate in the doctor's clinic plummeted to between 1% and 2%. The data was completely clear.
It was striking.
So logical falsification wins, the paradigm shifts, and Semmelweis is hailed as a medical savior. Correct.
Unfortunately, no. This is where Kuhn's human factor takes over. The established medical community found the idea that they were causing the deaths deeply offensive.
Their egos couldn't handle it.
Exactly. Furthermore, germ theory did not exist yet. There was no accepted underlying paradigm to explain why the chlorine worked.
So they just rejected it.
Yeah. Without a theoretical framework that made sense to them, the establishment rejected his data. Semmelweis was dismissed, his practices were largely abandoned, and he eventually died in an asylum.
Oh, that is so tragic.
It's a brutal reminder that sound empirical evidence can be entirely discarded when it contradicts the prevailing beliefs of the authorities in power.
That is infuriating, but it really shows why scientific reasoning requires fighting external resistance. So let's look at a case where the reasoning successfully broke through. London, 1854. John Snow and the Broad Street water pump.
A classic case. Cholera was ravaging the Soho district. And again, the dominant paradigm of the era was miasma theory, the belief that diseases were spread by foul-smelling, corrupt air.
But John Snow suspected otherwise.
Mm.
And instead of just debating the theory, he mapped the data.
Right.
He walked the streets and plotted every single cholera death on a map of the neighborhood. He didn't even have a lab. He just used observational data.
And he noticed the deaths clustered incredibly tightly around one specific public water pump on Broad Street. But mapping the deaths was only step one.
Right.
The brilliant part of Snow's reasoning was how he applied Popper's concept of falsification. He didn't just look for cases that supported his waterborne theory, he actively hunted for cases that should have resulted in death, but didn't.
He went looking for the waterproof watches he couldn't break.
Yeah.
He found a local brewery situated right near the pump. The workers there were breathing the exact same supposedly bad air as everyone else, yet they weren't getting sick. Why? Because they were given an allowance of beer and drank that all day instead of the pump water.
Which saved their lives.
By actively seeking out disconfirming evidence, Snow strengthened his case beyond a reasonable doubt. He convinced the authorities to remove the handle from the Broad Street pump, and the local outbreak subsided.
Snow was inferring a cause from natural, messy data by systematically ruling out alternatives.
Which is exactly what the exams want you to do.
Exactly. When nursing exams present you with a scenario and ask you to identify the strongest piece of evidence, they're testing your ability to think like Snow. Can you spot the data point that actively rules out the competing theory?
Okay, so Snow and Semmelweis were fighting external resistance from the medical establishment. But the scariest part of scientific reasoning isn't external politics. It's our own internal wiring.
Oh, for sure.
Our brains actively fight against the logic of falsification. There was this psychological experiment in 1966 called the Watson selection task that mathematically proved just how badly our minds want to cheat the process.
Yeah, Peter Watson designed this deceptively simple puzzle. Imagine 4 cards sitting on a table in front of you.
Okay.
The cards show an E, a K, a 4, and a 7.
E, K, 4, 7. Got it.
You're told every card has a letter on one side and a number on the other. Then you're given a specific rule to test. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other side. The question is, which cards must you turn over to determine if the rule is true or false?
Okay, let me think through this like someone taking the exam. The rule is, if vowel, then even. So the first card is an E. That's a vowel. I definitely want to flip the E because if there's an odd number on the back, the rule is broken.
Right. Most people get that part. Flipping the E is a search for confirmation, but it also risks falsifying the rule. So what do you flip next?
Well, the next cards are K, 4, and 7. K is a consonant, so the rule doesn't apply. I'll ignore it.
Makes sense.
Then there's the 4. The rule says vowels have even numbers on the back, so I want to flip the 4 to see if there's a vowel on the other side, confirming the rule again.
And that is the trap.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Flipping the 4 feels satisfying, but it's logically useless. Read the rule carefully. If a card has a vowel, it has an even number. It does not say that only vowels have even numbers.
Right.
If you flip the 4 and find a consonant like a K, the rule is still perfectly intact. A consonant is allowed to have an even number. Finding a vowel just confirms what you already suspect, but it doesn't test the rule's limits.
Wow. Wait, so flipping the even number does nothing to prove the rule is unbreakable?
Yeah.
To actually test it, I have to try to break it. I have to look at the 7.
Exactly.
Because if I flip the 7 and there is an A or an E on the other side, a vowel paired with an odd number, the rule is instantly destroyed.
Yes. The only logically correct answer is to flip the E and the 7. You must look for the vowel that breaks the rule and the odd number that hides a vowel.
That is wild.
But across decades of running this experiment, only about 10% of people naturally choose the correct combination. Humans are hardwired to look for the 4. We default to confirmation bias.
We seek information that supports our existing beliefs, while completely ignoring the 7s, the evidence that could prove us wrong.
Which is terrifying when you think about it.
It is, and that cognitive blind spot is exactly what exam questions are hunting for. When a question asks you to identify the flaw in this reasoning, the flaw is almost always confirmation bias. It's someone drawing a massive conclusion without checking the 7 card.
Right. And when scientists let this bias creep into their work, the entire system breaks down. We've seen some catastrophic failures when the guardrails of reasoning are bypassed.
Yeah, the sources outline a few major modern failures, like the 1989 cold fusion scandal.
Yeah.
2 chemists held a press conference announcing they had achieved nuclear fusion at room temperature.
Which would have changed the global energy landscape overnight.
Right. But they skipped peer review entirely. They went straight to the media instead of letting other scientists try to falsify their work. And independent labs scrambled to replicate the setup, found nothing, and the claim collapsed within months.
But a more damaging example is the 1998 paper published in The Lancet claiming a link between the MMR vaccine and autism.
Oh, this one is infuriating.
It really is. This paper was a masterclass in failed scientific reasoning. It was based on a sample size of only 12 children. There was absolutely no control group for comparison.
It's just terrible science.
And it gets worse. Subsequent investigations revealed that the lead author had undisclosed financial conflicts of interest and had actively manipulated the clinical data.
Which perfectly illustrates another vital exam concept, the difference between correlation and causation. Even if we pretend the data wasn't faked, just because a child received a vaccine and later developed autism, it does not mean the vaccine caused the autism.
Exactly. 2 variables can rise together, meaning they're correlated without one causing the other. For instance, ice cream sales and drowning deaths always spike at the exact same time of year.
Right.
But eating ice cream doesn't cause drowning. The hidden third factor, the confounding variable, is the summer heat, which causes people to both buy ice cream and go swimming.
The 1998 study reliably found a correlation, but it completely lacked the controlled variables needed to prove causation. I actually want to bring in another set of vocabulary words here for the exam. Validity versus reliability.
Great point.
That terrible 1998 study reminds me of a broken bathroom scale. Like if I step on a scale 5 times in a row and every single time it tells me I weigh exactly 50 pounds more than I actually do,
Yeah.
that scale is highly reliable.
Yeah, it gives you consistent, repeatable results.
But it is completely invalid because it's measuring the wrong weight entirely.
That analogy perfectly captures the distinction. Reliability is about consistency. Validity is about accuracy. Are you actually measuring what you claim to be measuring? The 1998 study lacked both, but even if it had reliably produced the same correlation in other small groups, its conclusion about causation was entirely invalid. The paper was fully retracted, the author lost his medical license, but the social damage was permanent. It sparked a wave of vaccine hesitancy that we are still fighting today.
Which proves you cannot just blindly trust a headline that says a new study shows.
Yeah.
And, it's not always malicious fraud either. Sometimes it's the pressure of the academic system itself. This became glaringly obvious during the 2015 replication crisis.
Yes. An initiative called the Open Science Collaboration attempted to rigorously replicate 100 well-known published psychology studies, and they found that, depending on how you measured it, only about a third to a half of the original findings could be successfully reproduced.
That is staggering. Over half of the established science they tested just vanished when someone double-checked the work. How does that happen in prestigious journals without anyone faking data?
Well, it exposed subtle systemic flaws, primarily a practice called p-hacking.
P-hacking.
Yeah. In the publish or perish culture of academia, scientists need significant results to keep their jobs. P-hacking occurs when a researcher runs dozens of different statistical tests on their data, tweaking variables and excluding outliers until the math randomly produces a result that looks statistically significant.
So they just keep rolling the dice until they get a Yahtzee.
Pretty much. They then publish that specific, polished result and bury all the failed attempts.
It's like shooting a machine gun at the side of a barn, walking up to the one cluster of bullets that happen to be close together, drawing a bullseye around them, and claiming you're a sharpshooter.
That is precisely the illusion. The ultimate takeaway from the replication crisis and a core principle for any scientific field is that a single peer-reviewed study is never settled fact.
Never.
Science requires converging evidence. It requires independent verification across multiple labs over time.
So we need to bust a few major misconceptions before we wrap up. The first one is language. When someone in normal conversation says, "Oh, my idea about who stole the cookies is just a theory," they mean it's a wild guess or a hunch.
But in the realm of scientific reasoning, a theory is the heavyweight champion of evidence. It is a robust, extensively tested framework that has survived relentless attempts at falsification. It is the highest level of understanding we have.
Right. Another massive misconception is the idea that science proves things with absolute, unchanging certainty.
Which Popper taught us is impossible. Science doesn't deal in absolute certainty. It deals in well-tested confidence. It operates by ruling out false explanations and provisionally keeping whatever survives the gauntlet.
Provisionally being the key word.
Exactly. The foundational rule of science is that every theory is open to revision or replacement the moment better, more precise evidence comes along.
And this isn't just about bubbling in the right letter on a multiple-choice nursing exam. This reasoning is the literal engine of evidence-based practice, or EBP.
It absolutely is.
When you are a working nurse, making clinical decisions for a patient at 3 a.m., your choices have to rest on the best available, rigorously tested research, not just on the tradition of, well, this is how this hospital's always done it.
When a new drug trial is published, your training in scientific reasoning gives you the tools to interrogate it. You'll naturally ask, was the sample size large enough to be meaningful? Did they use a proper control group?
Have independent labs replicated this finding?
Exactly. You learn to evaluate the quality of the evidence before you trust a new protocol with your patients' lives.
And honestly, it changes how you interact with the world every day. When a social media headline screams that one tiny observational study proves a certain superfood cures cancer, you are immune to the hype.
To look for the confounding variables.
To check if they actually established causation or just found a random correlation. You understand how to find the 7 card.
Because scientific reasoning is not a static textbook definition. It is a disciplined, iterative, often exhausting process of fighting our own confirmation bias and demanding rigorous, falsifiable evidence.
We have traveled from Francis Bacon's inductive logic through the cholera outbreaks of London all the way to modern packing. You are now armed with the history, the terminology, and the mindset to crush those entrance exams. You know the mechanics of thinking like a scientist.
But before we conclude, considering how much this process relies on human observation and the limits of our own logic, I want to leave you with a thought about the future.
Oh, I like this.
We talked about how John Snow mapped data by hand to falsify the miasma theory. But today, hospitals are increasingly relying on artificial intelligence and complex algorithms to diagnose patients and predict outcomes.
Which is incredible, but also a little intimidating.
Right. These algorithms can process millions of data points, far more than a human mind, but they often operate as black boxes. Even their programmers don't always know exactly how the AI arrived at its conclusion.
Wait, so if Popper says science requires theories to be falsifiable, how do we apply that to an algorithm?
That is the frontier you will be working on. If an AI diagnoses a patient based on a pattern hidden in billions of data points that a human doctor can't perceive, how do we test that hypothesis?
Wow.
How do we falsify a machine's intuition? As you enter the healthcare field, figuring out how to maintain rigorous scientific reasoning when the reasoning is being done by a black box that might just be the most critical challenge of your career, something for you to ponder as you dive into your studies.